There is a strange phenomenon that happens when you begin to master silence. At first it feels uncomfortable, unnatural even. People around you expect responses, quick, polished, agreeable. They grow uneasy when your reply doesn't come fast enough. But in that moment of pause, a subtle shift takes place. Suddenly, you're no longer reacting, you're observing. You begin to see what others don't. The tremble in a voice, the anxious darting of eyes, the desperation wrapped inside casual words. Most people cannot see beneath the surface because they're too busy trying to be seen. But the one who chooses silence learns how to watch without being watched, to read without being read. This is not about being deceptive, it is about being awake. In a world of noise, quiet becomes your superpower. And in that quiet, the world reveals its secrets. Imagine walking into a room filled with conversation, tension humming in the air. Everyone is talking about business, politics, relationships, ideas. Each person tries to outdo the other in speed, wit, volume. But then, there's one person in the corner, saying nothing, watching, listening, measuring. And without a word, that person becomes the most powerful presence in the room. It's not a trick, it's not some magic act. It's simply that silence amplifies presence. It draws people in, it makes them curious. It forces them to wonder, what are you thinking? What are you hiding? And in their effort to decode you, they start revealing more of themselves. Silence, when wielded with intention, becomes the mirror that reflects the truth others can't help but show. This is what Machiavelli understood, and it remains timeless. We have been conditioned to fill every space with speech, every void with noise. But ask yourself, how many times have you said something just to avoid discomfort? How often do you rush to respond out of fear that silence will be mistaken for weakness? That fear is what keeps most people stuck. They speak too soon, too much, too often. They offer their thoughts before they understand their position. They reveal their hearts before the other has even asked. They expose their strategy before the game has begun. And in doing so, they give away the very power they wish to hold. The silence you fear is the place your strength begins. It teaches restraint. It teaches patience. It teaches you to value your words, to hold them as tools, not toys. Strategic silence is not passive. It's not avoidance. It is a deeply conscious act. It says, I am in control of my mind, my tongue, my moment. It says, I do not need to impress you with speech. I choose when and how I express. And this decision, this self-governance, is what begins to attract a different kind of respect. Not the kind that claps the loudest, but the kind that listens deeply. When you speak rarely, every word carries more weight. When you hold back, people lean in. And when you finally choose to say something, it lands, flourish, but because it came from silence. And silence has a power that no sound can fake. People may not tell you this, but they notice how you carry yourself in silence. They notice whether your stillness comes from strength or from fear. And that difference matters. The silence of insecurity hides. The silence of power waits. You become unpredictable. Not in a chaotic way, but in a way that commands respect. No one knows exactly what you're thinking. They can't preempt your moves. They can't corner you with words. You remain fluid, uncatchable. It's why leaders who talk too much often collapse under the weight of their own promises. They've locked themselves into expectations. But the one who speaks little can pivot, adapt, change course without contradiction. Silence then becomes freedom. The freedom to move without explanation, to act without forewarning, to choose your moment, not be forced into one. In every moment of silence, a seed is planted. Some grow into trust, others grow into mystery, a few grow into fear, but all are powerful. Because silence lets others reveal themselves while you remain untouched. And that revelation is gold. In negotiation, the person who waits hears more than the one who speaks. In conflict, the one who listens sees the hidden wound behind the aggression. In relationships, the silent one is often the one who understands more, because they're listening not just to words, but to tone, to body language, to the spaces between sentences. That is the level of awareness silence brings. It turns you into a student of the moment. It teaches you that words are never just words, they are signals. and silence is the language that decodes them. This isn't about becoming distant or detached. It's about being fully present in a way most people aren't. It's about recognizing that most communication isn't happening through words at all. It's about choosing your responses instead of reacting impulsively. And that choice changes everything. It gives you power over yourself first, which is the only way to ever have influence over others. Machiavelli didn't just preach manipulation. As you lean deeper into the power of silence, something unexpected begins to unfold. Your presence changes. People start reacting to you differently. Not because you've altered how you dress or speak, but because you've shifted how you occupy space. Silence has a gravity to it. It draws attention without demanding it. It creates weight without volume. And in that shift, you begin to see how noise had diluted your energy all along. Every time you tried to explain yourself, to clarify, to justify, you were giving away pieces of your power. But now, with silence as your ally, you carry that power intact. You become like still water, calm on the surface, but hiding depth and force that can reshape the landscape when it finally moves. The beauty of silence is that it doesn't beg. It doesn't chase applause or agreement. It doesn't scramble to prove. It simply exists, strong, unmoved. And from that existence, it invites others to rise to your level. You begin to notice how others shift when they speak to you. Their words become more careful, their tone more measured, because without realizing it, they feel the depth behind your quiet. They sense that you're not reacting, you're absorbing. You're not speaking just to speak, you're waiting for something meaningful. That makes people listen harder. It makes your eventual words land with more impact. You don't have to raise your voice. The silence does it for you. When you finally do speak, it feels like thunder after a long, tense sky. There's also a discipline that develops when you become fluent in silence. You stop leaking energy through gossip, complaints, unnecessary explanations. You stop giving others a map to your mind. Your silence becomes yield. It guards your intentions, protects your process, and conceals your vulnerabilities. This isn't about deception, it's about sovereignty. Your thoughts are yours to direct, not something to be harvested by anyone who asks. You learn that just because someone wants an answer doesn't mean they deserve one. Just because someone expects a response doesn't mean you owe them a performance. You begin to speak less, but mean more. Every sentence becomes deliberate. Every word becomes a tool, not thrown carelessly, but placed with precision. This shift changes how you engage with time too. You no longer feel the rush to respond immediately. You're okay with space. You welcome pauses, because you know that silence holds insight. It gives you time to consider, to reflect, to choose a better angle. The loud live in reaction, the silent live in design. You wait until you've seen all the angles, until the timing aligns, until the words feel necessary. And when you do act, your action is rooted, not rushed. This doesn't slow you down. It actually speeds up your effectiveness. You make fewer mistakes. You burn less energy. You waste less emotion. Because you've traded impulse for clarity, and that exchange pays dividends with every decision. What's most surprising, though, is how silence deepens your relationship with yourself. In stillness, you start to hear your own inner voice again, not the fear-based one, but the quiet knowing that's always been there beneath the noise. You begin to trust it. You begin to follow it. That's when alignment happens. You're no longer swayed by trends or trapped by the opinions of others. You don't move because someone else told you to. You move because something within said, now. And when you follow that inner compass, your choices sharpen, your path clears, and your confidence becomes less about ego and more about essence. You trust your timing, your silence, your knowing. You stop doubting yourself into speech. You let your actions speak instead. Others will start to notice this shift. They won't be able to name it exactly, but they'll feel it. You'll walk into a room and the energy will adjust. You'll speak few words and people will remember them. You'll say no once and it will echo louder than someone else's 5-minute explanation. That's the power of silence. It amplifies everything that matters and deletes everything that doesn't. And in a world addicted to distraction, that kind of clarity is magnetic. It's not about becoming intimidating. It's about becoming anchored. It's about being rooted so deeply in yourself that you don't need to prove or perform or persuade. Your presence becomes the statement. But here's the part many forget. Mastering silence isn't about being cold or distant. It's about being precise. It's about tuning into what matters so deeply that you no longer waste time or breath on anything less. You can still be kind, you can still be compassionate, but your kindness will come with boundaries. Your compassion will come with discernment. You won't speak to win people over. You'll speak to connect when it's real. You won't engage to avoid awkwardness. You'll engage when it serves truth. This makes you more authentic, not less, because silence strips away the fluff, the filler, the filters, and what's left is your real self, clear, calm, and unapologetically honest. Eventually, you realize silence isn't just something you use, it becomes something you are. You embody it. You become the calm in the storm, the pause in the panic, the clarity in the confusion. And people start to trust you, not because you always have the answers, but because they feel you're not guessing. You've done the inner work. You've faced your discomfort. You've earned your peace. That kind of person is rare. That kind of energy doesn't chase, it attracts. It doesn't push, it pulls. It doesn't dominate, it invites. And in the end, that's what makes silence such a powerful force. It's not just what it hides, it's what it reveals. About you, about others, about life itself. There comes a point when silence stops being a strategy and becomes a way of seeing. It's as if the whole world begins to slow down, not because it actually has, but because you're no longer racing through it. You hear things differently, not just the words, but the spaces between them. You start to notice what people aren't saying, the subtle shifts in tone, the quiet hesitations, the nervous laughs. Where others hear surface noise, you hear the undercurrent, the truth, trembling beneath the facade. And once you hear that, it becomes impossible to unhear. You can never go back to casual listening. You've crossed a threshold. You've learned that what people say often isn't what they mean, and what they mean is rarely said aloud. Silence has taught you to listen for what's real. In this silence, you also begin to detach from the need to respond. You realize that not every comment deserves a counter. Not every slight requires a defense. Most arguments you come to see are just echoes of people's pain, looking for a place to land. And you're not a target anymore. You're not there to absorb it. You're there to witness it without becoming it. This doesn't make you passive, it makes you powerful. Because now, instead of reacting emotionally, you're choosing your response. You're pausing, breathing, and then speaking only if it adds something necessary to the moment. Sometimes the most powerful response is none at all. Sometimes your refusal to engage is the clearest statement you can make. And when you stop feeding the fires of drama, people notice. They either rise to meet your level, or they fall away. That's another truth silence brings. Not everyone can follow you into it. Some people depend on noise to stay distracted. Some need chaos to avoid themselves. When you go quiet, they panic, they accuse, they provoke, they fill the gap with their own assumptions. But let them. That discomfort they feel is not your responsibility. It's just the silence doing its job, revealing what was always there. You're not withholding. You're protecting. You're maintaining the sacredness of your inner world, guarding it from those who haven't earned the right to enter it. Not every opinion deserves a place in your mind. Not every energy deserves a seat at your table. Silence becomes your gatekeeper, filtering what enters your spirit. And as you continue this practice, something deeper awakens. You begin to hear your own voice with new clarity. It's quieter than you expected, gentler, not the harsh critic or anxious planner that used to live in your head. No, this voice doesn't shout. It whispers. It says things like, "You already know," or "That's not for you," or simply, "Wait." You realize it was there all along, buried beneath your overthinking, your people-pleasing, your explanations. And now, in silence, it finally has space to speak. This voice becomes your guide, your anchor. While others are looking outside for answers, you've found something steady within. You no longer feel the need to chase clarity. You simply sit still and listen. With this internal alignment comes a transformation in how you move through the world. You become less interested in being understood by everyone and more committed to understanding yourself. You start to lose the desire to explain your choices, defend your path, or seek validation for your growth. You don't need loud applause anymore. You don't crave being right. You're content with being real. Silence has made your peace more important than being liked. It's a trade-off, and not everyone will understand it, but you do. Because you know that being misunderstood is a small price to pay for living in your truth. There's a particular kind of power that grows from this place. Not the kind that intimidates or commands with force, but the kind that draws people in with presence alone. You walk into a room and say nothing, and people turn. They sense something. They can't name it, but they feel it. It's the energy of someone who doesn't need to be seen because they've already seen themselves. Someone who doesn't need to speak because they know their silence speaks louder. That's when you understand silence isn't a tactic anymore. It's your nature. It's how you breathe. It's how you protect your peace, and it's how you carry your power. And what makes this all so rare is that silence requires courage. It takes strength to sit in stillness when others demand noise. It takes confidence to resist the pressure to react, to clarify, to defend. It takes wisdom to know that restraint is not weakness, but mastery. People who are not at peace with themselves will always try to shake you. They'll try to provoke you into proving yourself. But silence teaches you that you have nothing to prove. If your silence makes someone uncomfortable, that's their mirror, not your responsibility. You don't owe the world your voice every time it knocks. Sometimes what you withhold carries more meaning than anything you could say. Eventually, even in your relationships, silence becomes the test. Not just your silence, but theirs. Can they sit with it, or do they panic? Can they respect it, or do they demand to break it? Can they meet you in stillness without trying to fill it? These answers tell you everything. Because silence reveals not just your truth, but the truth of those around you. And once you've seen that, you can't pretend anymore. You begin to choose peace over proximity, solitude over noise, authenticity over attention. This isn't about becoming distant or cold, it's about becoming deliberate. You speak when it matters. You engage when it's mutual. You listen with intent. And that kind of presence is magnetic. People are drawn to it not because it's loud, but because it's rare. You've become the calm in the storm. You've become the voice that doesn't need to shout. You've become the kind of person whose silence speaks volumes. And in a world addicted to noise, that is the ultimate form of power. Imagine a world where everything you said echoed permanently, where every thought uttered became a thread others could pull on, unraveling your strategy, your peace, your presence. Now imagine the opposite, a world where your silence held the weight of mountains, where your pause meant more than a paragraph, and your restraint rewrote the entire script of power. This is not imagination. It's the realm of those who master the art of silence. The modern world, drenched in overexposure, social commentary, and impulsive revelation, has forgotten this ancient commandment that silence is not absence, it is architecture. And when you understand its structure, its weight, and its purpose, you start building something no noise could ever accomplish. Authority that doesn't announce itself, respect that isn't demanded, clarity that doesn't require defense. There's something inherently unnerving about a person who listens more than they speak. People are uncomfortable around quiet confidence because it doesn't offer them a foothold. They don't know where you stand. They can't read your motives. They can't predict your next move. And that discomfort, it shifts power, because now they're reacting to your silence instead of you reacting to their noise. You've reversed the dynamic, turned the tables, and without raising your voice, without uttering a word, you've changed the whole energy of the room. It's not that you're hiding, it's that you're holding your truth, your thoughts, your strategy, like a warrior holds a blade, only drawn when the moment is right. And here's where it becomes almost mystical. Silence doesn't just protect your strategy, it deepens your perception. The less you speak, the more you hear. Not just the words, but the fractures between them. You start to pick up on the inconsistencies, the subtle lies people tell themselves, the emotional tremors beneath polished stories. You become attuned not just to what's said, but what's meant. It's a superpower disguised as stillness. While others are focused on getting their message across, you're gathering intelligence. You're noticing who repeats themselves, who overshares, who seeks approval, who can't sit in silence without panicking. And from these observations, you build an understanding far more accurate than anything a confession could offer. There's a reason ancient sages, warriors, and rulers valued silence as a sign of maturity. It's not because they were timid. It's because they understood that the loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful. True power doesn't perform, it simply exists, and people feel it. It's in your breath, your gaze, your stillness. Silence forces the world to lean in. It creates a void that others rush to fill. It invites curiosity, speculation, even reverence. It places you outside the frantic dance of reaction and instead seats you on the throne of conscious choice. But make no mistake, this isn't about being passive or disconnected. This is active silence, intentional quiet, a discipline born from mastery over the ego. Because the ego wants to interrupt, to correct, to defend, to be seen. But your higher self knows that silence doesn't mean surrender, it means sovereignty. It means I don't need to prove myself in this moment because I already know who I am. And in that space, the game changes. People begin to question their assumptions. They replay your silence like a puzzle they can't solve. You leave them with uncertainty, not because you're manipulative, but because you understand that uncertainty gives birth to respect, while predictability gives birth to complacency. This power of quiet influence isn't something you flaunt, it's something you embody. It shows up when you choose not to respond to bait, when you smile instead of defend, when you walk away instead of explain, when your actions speak while your mouth remains still. That's when you realize silence is not the opposite of communication. It's the refinement of it. You're no longer filling space, you're shaping it. You're no longer adding noise, you're becoming the music beneath it. And perhaps the most surprising transformation is internal. The more you practice strategic silence with others, the more you start offering it to yourself. You begin to listen to your thoughts without reacting to them. You start to sit with discomfort instead of trying to talk your way out of it. You let emotions rise and fall like waves instead of narrating them into chaos. This internal silence is where true self-trust is born. You stop seeking reassurance from others because you've created a space within that holds you. You stop performing for approval because your silence has become a sanctuary. And in that sanctuary, everything changes. You'll notice your anxiety diminish, not because life became easier, but because you stopped feeding it with overthinking. You'll notice your relationships shift, not because you became distant, but because you stopped giving energy to the inauthentic. You'll notice your decisions improve, not because you gained more knowledge, but because you made room for your intuition to speak. This is the gift of silence. It isn't empty, it's full of insight, of observation, of deliberate choice. People might not understand this at first. They'll wonder why you don't respond like you used to, why you seem harder to read, why your presence feels different. Some will misinterpret your silence as arrogance. Others will mistake it for detachment. Let them, because your peace is no longer dependent on their interpretation. Your silence is no longer about them. It's about you choosing how and when your energy is shared. And in a world where everyone is performing, oversharing, and fighting to be heard, your refusal to participate becomes the most powerful voice in the room. You don't need to explain why you're silent. You don't need to justify your restraint. You don't owe your inner world to anyone who hasn't earned the right to witness it. The more you live in alignment with that truth, the more powerful your silence becomes. It stops being a strategy, it becomes a lifestyle, a sacred container for your energy, a statement without sound, a declaration without words. Because at the end of the day, the deepest wisdom is not shouted, the truest strength is not loud, and the most commanding presence needs no introduction. It simply arrives, quiet, steady, unbothered. And in that silence, the world listens. Silence, when fully understood, becomes more than a tactic. It becomes a mirror. It shows you yourself. Not the version of you others try to define with their words, their expectations, their assumptions, but the real you. The one who doesn't need to announce his worth to feel valuable. The one who doesn't seek validation in noise, but stands grounded in the stillness of his being. And once you taste this level of self-possession, everything else, arguments, misunderstandings, judgments, loses its grip on your peace. You begin to realize that silence is not just means to deal with others. It's how you return to yourself. It's how you hear the truth beneath the chaos. Because there's always a deeper layer that noise drowns out, and silence becomes your tool to reach it. In that place, something profound happens. You stop reacting. You stop defending every misunderstanding or proving every doubt wrong. Instead, you allow your stillness to respond. You realize you don't have to show up to every argument you're invited to. You don't need to participate in every emotional storm someone tries to drag you into. You're not being passive, you're being selective. Not from fear, but from wisdom. You know that energy is currency, and you're done spending it recklessly. You're done wasting it on battles that only serve the ego, not your evolution. And here's the ultimate shift. The less you speak from ego, the more space your soul has to express itself. Your words become fewer, but they hold more weight. People begin to notice that when you speak, it matters. That when you share something, it's not to impress, but to illuminate. You become a presence that doesn't demand the spotlight, yet draws all eyes. Not through performance, but through authenticity. And that kind of presence can't be faked. It comes from walking through the fire of restraint, from choosing silence when every part of you wants to speak, from holding back not because you're scared, but because you trust that your energy speaks louder than your voice ever could. There's a special kind of power in being unpredictable, when no one knows your next move because you don't feel the need to announce it. When people can't manipulate you because they can't figure out what buttons to press. When they can't project their narrative onto you because you no longer offer them the script. This is the power of silence. It strips people of the tools they use to control or diminish you. And it places those tools back in your hands, not for revenge, but for restoration, for reclaiming your energy, for choosing peace, not as a last resort, but as a conscious lifestyle. And over time, people change their tone around you. They begin to measure their words more carefully. They show up with more respect, more intentionality. Not because you demanded it, but because your silence raised the standard. You didn't set boundaries with loud declarations. You became the boundary. Your quiet, unwavering self-respect did the talking. You showed them, through your restraint, what you would and would not allow. And nothing is more powerful than that. Because when you no longer speak out of desperation, everything you say comes from alignment. Every word becomes a choice, not a reaction. Even in times of conflict, you begin to see things differently. You stop arguing to win. You start observing to understand. You listen not to reply, but to discern. You let others reveal themselves through their need to dominate the conversation, to prove, to impress. And while they burn themselves out, you see, with performance, you conserve your energy. You stay composed. You protect your peace. And often, that silence becomes your loudest message. It says, I know who I am. I don't need to convince you. And as this energy becomes your baseline, life starts shifting in your favor. You begin to attract people who value depth, who recognize the power in pauses, who don't fear your silence but feel safer in it. These are the people who don't exhaust you with noise, who don't ask you to shrink just so they can feel big. These are the connections that nourish instead of deplete. And you start to see that by holding your silence, you've made room for the relationships, the opportunities, the experiences that were always meant for the most authentic version of you. Because silence purifies. It filters out the distractions, the illusions, the false attachments. It brings clarity not by adding more, but by removing what's not true. It reveals what noise tried to hide. And from that clarity, you make decisions that change everything. Not because they're flashy, but because they're rooted. You begin to move with quiet conviction. You stop needing others to agree before you trust your own path. You trust your timing, you trust your process, and most importantly, you trust yourself. So now ask yourself, when was the last time you sat in your own silence and just listened? Not for answers, not for solutions, but just to witness what lives within you when the world stops spinning. That's the place Machiavelli knew held true power. That's the space where strategy is born, where character is forged, Where presence is refined, it's the space most avoid. But it's the space that separates the reactive from the intentional, the insecure from the grounded, the noise from the power. And if you've walked with me through this message, if something in you feels the shift, then let this truth settle in your bones. You do not need to be loud to be heard. You do not need to constantly speak to leave an impression. You do not need to announce your greatness. Your silence already speaks it. The world doesn't need more voices, it needs more presence. And you, in your quiet power, are already enough. As we draw the final breath of this journey into silence and power, remember that the stillness you carry within is not emptiness, it is presence. It is the calm clarity that allows you to act when others react, to observe when others speak, to influence without ever needing to impress. In a world that mistakes noise for significance, your quiet strength becomes your revolution. You don't need to be louder, you just need to be truer. Let your silence carve out space for truth, for peace, for depth. Let it remind you that power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply waits, steady and unshakable. And in that waiting, in that discipline, you'll find yourself leading, not with force, but with presence. That is the wisdom. That is the way. That is Zen awakening.